Hello, my name is Rudy Solorzano, and this is going to be a quick tutorial on how to animate a bouncing ball in Maya 2024. This recording is specifically for my Art 255B course at Cal State Fullerton, Intro to Animation. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you have your Maya space open. Obviously, I already have a new workspace, but you want to make sure that you have a brand new workspace. So now that I'm in my workspace, the next thing I want to do is make sure that I add my rig. The first thing I'm going to do is go to File. I then am going to go down to Create Reference. I'm going to find the specific reference that I want, and that's going to be my ball rig, Yolanda Afan rig from 2018. Shout out to Yolanda. Great rig, by the way. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that when I am doing this bouncing ball for the first time, I'm just focusing on the two-dimensional plane first. I don't want to get into 3D too quickly. I just want to focus on timing and spacing for this specific assignment. So the first thing I'm going to do before I start even animating this is I'm going to make sure that I go into my front view. So just so you all know what I'm doing, I'm holding down the space bar and I'm holding down the left click button on my mouse. I'm going to scroll down to front view, and from here I don't have to worry about the third dimension anymore. I can just focus on animating this bouncing ball in 2D space. The next thing that I want to make sure that I do is that I'm animating in the view that the audience will be seeing this from. So I'm going to go up to here in this little film gate, and I just want to see exactly what the audience is going to see when I am animating this bouncing ball. Next thing that I want to do is I actually want to put this in my personal viewing workspace, which is 3 panes split from the left and sometimes the right side. For this one, I'm going to do the right side. So now I know exactly what my bouncing ball is going to look like in this screen right over here. So now that I have done that, the next and last thing that I want to do before I get started, for this animation specifically, I am encouraging anyone who has never done a bouncing ball before to use reference. So I encourage it for anyone who is learning for the first time, but if you want to become even better at animating, I highly recommend that you do this a multitude of times without reference. So to add a quick reference, the first thing that I'm going to do is go over to my View tab. Coming down from the View tab, I'm going to select Image Plane and Import Image. From here, I'm going to select the reference that I already have in my folder. It's one that I picked up from online. To the individual who's created this reference, thank you so much. It's incredibly helpful. But the first thing I'm going to do is kind of zoom in by pressing the F key. And I'm just going to make this reference sized up to what I need it to be, which is about the same size as my ball rig. So I want it to be about the same size as the ball so that I can follow along this reference very, very easily. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set this reference now to be aligned with my grid, so it's going to be a lot easier for me to follow along. Now that I have done this, the next thing I'm going to do is, again, reframe my viewport so that I can see exactly what the audience will be seeing when I am animating this. And finally, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a brand new layer for this reference so that I don't accidentally animate it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go here and in my channel box and my layer editor, I'm going to scroll down and click this create a new layer and assign from selected objects. I have my reference selected, so when I click on this, it will automatically include this object. Now that I have that selected, just to make sure that I have the right object selected, I'm going to press the V button here, which for me stands for View. And as you can see, I know it's in this layer because when I click the View tab, it automatically disappears. I'll be honest, I don't know what P does, but this empty box on the side, if I click on that, we get a T. That T for me, at least, stands for transparency, so now I can see through the object. But what I want is to click this again, so it says R. Now R, I take to stand for reference, and now I cannot touch this reference even if I wanted to. So I don't have to worry about my reference moving anymore. I can animate with confidence knowing that I'm not going to mess up the reference. So now that I have done that, the last thing that I like to do when I'm animating anything is I'll actually create a brand new layer for all the controllers that I know I'm going to be keying for this animation. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this reference. Remember, I can click this little V button and it will hide the reference in the background. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm now just going to select these controllers and add them into their own layer. So same thing as before, I'm going to click on create a new layer and assign from selected objects. Now remember that you don't have to do this workflow, but this definitely helps me and keeps things organized. So to make sure that I have that in my new layer, I'm going to go ahead and click the V. This is going to hide the selection that I have made. Now that I have done that, I'm just going to go down to each and every one of these and just keep adding to my selected layer. So I'm going to add selected objects. Now, a little quick tip for anyone who might want to do this faster. If you want to, you can use the G key, and the G key will replicate the last command that was made in Maya. Now, for me, that last command was adding these nodes into my new layer. So if I click on one of these and press G, it will automatically add it to my layer right over here. Now that I have done that, I'm going to go ahead and select the remainder of these. And now that I have done so, I can go ahead and click on this little box to bring back the view of my controllers. Now that I have done so, I'm going to go ahead and turn back on my animation reference. And now I can just completely animate in comfort, knowing that all of my controllers are in one place. So if I make a keyframe, they will all be keyed on that keyframe. The next thing I want to do is now finally start to animate. So for me personally, one thing that I like to do is I like to animate with my auto keyframe toggled on. You can see that little button here in the bottom right corner. When I click it, it automatically goes to the regular gray tone on the back. But if I click it again, you will see that it will become red. Now, if I just move the ball wherever I want, it's not going to key it. I still have to make sure that I press the S key. Once I press the S key, when I now go to my second frame, I can move this over here, and boom, it will automatically key my ball on the second frame. Now that I have done so, I'm just going to quickly go and follow this reference to the best of my ability. So really quickly, I'm going to go frame by frame and follow this reference exactly. Now, the reason why I say if you are very much interested in learning animation, I do highly recommend that you do this at least once with the reference and then practice doing without the reference. The reason why I say that is because if you only do what someone else has already done, you're not really learning necessarily. You're just repeating what's already been done. So to learn from that, make sure that you're practicing and doing this in a multitude of times. So as you can see right here, I stopped for a very specific reason. I think my ball is completely flush with the bottom of the ground, but my human eye isn't as good as seeing as the computer is. As you can see here on the y-axis, I'm actually just below 0.5, and I don't want it to be that way. I wanted to make sure that it's flush with the ground. So I'm going to press 0, and that's automatically, if you can see right here, if I just Control Z, you can see that even here it's lifted off of the ground a little bit. This is why I like working in 3 different viewports, so that I can see from different angles what the animation is going to look like. So now that I have that flat on the ground, I'm just going to quickly keep going throughout the rest of this, following along the guides. Now, as we're following this along, let me just quickly explain what's happening in the reference. As I come up here, we see that the ball hits and it's losing height on every single arc after the bounce. That's because gravity is pushing down on this ball. And as gravity is pushing down, it becomes much harder for the ball to get back up. And as a result, we lose energy after every ball bounce. And so as we continue to go down this arc, we can see that as it comes down and then finally comes back up to here, gravity is pushing down and more energy is lost as it continues to move forward. So the same thing as last time, I'm going to go ahead and utilize these number boxes here in the channel. That way it is much easier for me to make sure that I am flush with the ground. So I'm just going to continue going throughout the rest of this. Let's see, we're on frame 13, go up to 14. Now we're back up to 15 here. And same rules apply. As we get to our apex, we are getting less and less energy as we come down. And as you can tell, these balls are actually getting closer together because the spacing has less energy in them. So as I come down, now as you can tell, even for the reference here, as we're losing energy, there's going to be less of a squash because there is less of that force coming down upon the ball. And as we get to our final arc over here, we see there's not that much energy. So the ball is not only going to be lower, but it's also going to be a little bit closer on the apex as well. So now that we have this here, go ahead and put my last frame here. Now, even though it ends on 24 frames, for me personally, I do like having some extra frames at the end of my animation so that the audience can process that something has ended. Otherwise, if I make it end right at 24 frames, it might feel like it's just ending too abruptly or too fast for people to process what has happened. So one thing that I like to do is, depending on what the animation is, I like to add a little bit extra frames. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and key on my 30th frame. And instead of the 24 frames that I had originally, I'm going to now key this so that I end on the 30. And so let me go ahead and get rid of this, enter that. And now my timeline editor will end right at 30. So if I go ahead and hide my reference, and I turn off my NURB curves so it is easier to view the animation. Let me go ahead and go to viewport. If you want to get rid of anything inside of your viewport, this is where you want to go. To show you really quickly, you just go to the show tab. I'm going to go down to viewport, and then you can unclick anything you don't want to see in your scene. For me personally, I don't want to see the NURB curves because it can be very easy to get distracted by them. So now that I have just the bouncing ball, let's go ahead and put this at full screen, play this out. And there you go. So now that I have my bouncing ball, there's also a little bit of extra layer that I can add to this if you want to add some more personality. And that's simply squash and stretch. So to quickly demonstrate that, first thing I'm going to do is actually go back to this view. Let me turn back on my NURB curves. Now that I have that selected, I'm just going to politely go through here and watch my ball animation. I did see at one point there was a little bit of a jitter, as you can see right here. And that can be seen also in the channel box here. Now, this is actually a really great example of copying and pasting animation. I'm just going to politely copy this frame right here, making sure that I have my actual object selected. Going to copy this, and I'm just going to politely paste it here. So now when this animation plays out, I should not get that little jitter at the end. Just to confirm, boom, perfect. So now that I have this relatively cleaned up, one thing that I like to do is I like to see the arc of my animation. The best way to do that, in my opinion, is go to the Visualize tab up here. You're going to select Create Editable Motion Trail, but make sure you click the box here on the side. The reason why is because I like to determine exactly what the length of the motion trail is. For me, that's going to be start to end, 1 to 30. You can also do the time slider, but if your time slider has more frames than what is animated, it will include all of the motion trail up to the very end. So that's why I pick start to end. I like to tell Maya exactly when my animation ends. So now that I have done so, I'm going to go ahead and click Create Editable Motion Trail. And now I can see exactly what my motion trail is doing. And if I can look here, I can see that some of these apexes are actually a little askewed. I think I can do some cleanup here. This would be a good example of me being able to move this now here. Now that I have done so, I'm going to head and have that stay as so. With that being done now, I'm just going to go ahead and add some squash and stretch. And now that I have this arc, I can show you where those arcs should follow in regards to the blur or the squash or the stretch of this bouncing ball. So just to show you what I'm talking about, one thing, again, that I prefer to do for this bouncing ball specifically is because my stretch is at the very top, it will be very awkward for me to just move my bouncing ball like so. The better thing to do, in my opinion, for this bouncing ball specifically, or this rig, is to rotate the ball in the direction of where the squash will be. So now that I have done so, I'm just going to follow the kind of rotation along the diagonal of this arc. And as you can tell, it almost feels better too as it comes down. Making sure that I'm not spending too much time. Really, I just want to let you see why this will become important. So as I'm going down the arc, I'm rotating each time down until maybe I get to about here. And now I'm going to add my squash and stretch. I don't want to add it at the very apex because I don't have enough energy coming down here. But as you can tell, I have a pretty big jump from here to here. That is going to cause the eye to believe that this is going to be going faster, because in the span of one frame, I go from here to here, and similar from the span of here to here, it's smaller distance, so it feels like it will be slower. So I'm going to make sure that I have a little bit of stretch here, but really the biggest stretch is going to be right here. And as you can tell, it's maintained that same stretch. So what I want to make sure to do is actually press the S key right here. And I also want to make sure that it's zeroed out here. So really plain and simple. I'm just going to zero this out so it's much faster that way. And now that I have this keyed, when I go down here, it should maintain. Perfect. There you go. The last key that I had right here. Now from here to here, I want that to stretch a lot more because, again, that energy is quickening up. And as you can see, it definitely maintains going forward. So if anyone is ever having trouble with that, this is where having this extra layer comes in handy. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly select my objects in this. To make it even easier, though, I'm just going to rename this Controls. So now I know for certain that every time I click this, it will be the controls for my bouncing ball. Similarly, I'm going to name this Reference so that I know for certain anytime I want to know where my reference is, it is right here on this tab. So now that I have the controllers selected by, going on the layer, I'm going to right-click, select objects, and now all of the possible controls that I could ever want are in this selection. So I'm just going to politely press the S key, and what this does is make sure that every single possible key that I would use will for sure be maintained. How do I know that? So when I click on this bottom control that I've never used, mind you, I know for certain that there should be a key, and there is, of course. So now anytime I go forward after trying to maintain a shape, I should be able to maintain what was previously there. So just to make this easier on myself, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to Control Z all the way back. Before I add this stretch, just to demonstrate why this is going to be much faster for you going forward. So now that I am going back, let's go ahead and perfect. So now that I'm here, what I want to do is I want to select all those controls that I had before. So I'm going to select objects, and what I'm going to do is key every single key that I have here. So I will show you in just a moment why that is important, but just so you can see what's happening, even in the timeline, I am now adding keys that previously were not there on every single frame. And now that we have gotten to almost the end, perfect. Now, if I were to change the squash here by bringing that down, it will not maintain to the next frame because the next frame has this keyed already. This is an incredibly fast workflow. I prefer this way because it allows me to make changes without other frames being changed down the line as well. So really quickly, I want to make sure that this squash is appropriate. So let me make sure that the rotation is back and set to 0. That might cause some problems down the line, but just for the sake of simplicity, you get the idea. Now that I have it squashed here, I can now go to these other frames and stretch as I desire. So now that I've done that, I know for a fact it will not influence the next frame or the previous frame. So I can just mess around with this a little bit more. And then as you can tell, boom, that's what it feels like when we get a nice stretch and then squash. Same rules apply about right here as well. I'm going to kind of follow the arc a little bit more. You can, if you want to, put a little bit more of a stretch as well. But for this, remember, I'm losing energy as I am moving the ball forward in space. By here, there should be little to no stretch on this ball. Because again, I'm losing energy. I'm losing momentum. So that's it. Other than that, I would literally just keep going through and adding my stretches. Really quickly, let me just go ahead and do that. Just so you can see the bouncing ball and near completion. So again, I'm not spending too much time on this. Not getting too invested. Tweaking as I desire here and there. Remember, I'm losing energy, so I definitely don't want it to be as stretched as, say, this one for sure. So now that you can see that I'm losing energy, I'm coming down. I want to rotate this again back to 0. So it's flush with the ground. And add a little bit of stretch here, or squash. Remember, it should be less than the last one I have here. And it looks to be perfect. Awesome. So now that I've done that, again, kind of rotating this out. I should have little to no squash or stretch here. Coming down, maybe a little bit of stretch, ever so subtly. And then we'll have this come back. At 0 here. Cool. So now that we've done that, I also want to make sure that I add it here as well. So same rule. I'm going to copy this frame and I'm going to paste it here. So I know for certain it will be the exact same frame. Perfect. Now there's going to be a little bit of awkwardness because I have that texture up there. You're going to see a little bit of jitter on the ball. But the gist of the texture, the gist of the animation should still be there. Same thing. I'm going to quickly turn off my motion trail. To do so, all you need to do is go down to the viewport. I'm going to scroll down to turn off the curves first. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go down to, let's see, the motion trails. And now all I have is exactly what I want to see in the scene when I play this out. Boom, the bouncing ball. So that is it for this tutorial. Somewhere down the line, I will be uploading another tutorial on how to actually export this specifically for the class, but that is to come later. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.